The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the dusty trading post, and Marianne Stone stepped down onto Nevada soil with nothing but a worn carpetbag, a faded blue dress, and enough hope to fill the endless sky stretching above Humboldt. It was July 1876, and the small mining town shimmered in the afternoon heat like a mirage that might disappear if she blinked too hard. The driver tossed her bag down without ceremony, tipped his hat without meeting her eyes, and left her standing in a cloud of dust as the horses pulled away toward the next destination. She watched the coach disappear down the rutted road, feeling the weight of every choice that had brought her to this remote corner of the world. Back in Philadelphia, there had been whispers and pointing fingers after her father's business collapsed, and her engagement dissolved like sugar in rain. Thomas Whitmore had promised to love her through anything, but apparently anything did not include poverty and scandal. She had sold everything she owned except her grandmother's wedding ring, which hung on a thin chain beneath her collar, and bought passage west to a town where nobody knew her name or her shame. The trading post door swung open, and a weathered woman with silver streaks in her dark hair looked her up and down with the practiced assessment of someone who had seen countless dreamers and drifters pass through. "You looking for something, miss, or just standing there to take in the scenery?" Marianne straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. "I am looking for work, madam, any kind of honest work you might know of." The woman's expression softened slightly. "Honest work is about all we have out here. Come inside and get out of this heat. You look like you are about to melt into the ground." The interior of the trading post was marginally cooler, with rough wooden shelves stocked with supplies that represented lifelines in this harsh landscape. Flour, salt, coffee, ammunition, tools, and bolts of practical fabric filled every available surface. The woman introduced herself as Dorothy Blackwell and poured water from a clay jug into a tin cup, which Marianne accepted gratefully. "What kind of skills do you have?" Dorothy asked, leaning against the counter with the ease of someone who had found her place in the world and defended it successfully. "I can read and write, keep accounts, sew, cook, and I am quick to learn whatever else might be needed." Marianne took a long drink of the water, which tasted faintly metallic but felt like salvation sliding down her parched throat. Dorothy studied her with eyes that seemed to see past the travel-stained dress and the careful composure. "The schoolteacher position got filled last month. Most of the miners are not looking for a bookkeeper, but Martha Henderson, who runs the boarding house, has been complaining about needing help since her daughter married and moved to Carson City." It was not much, but it was a start. Marianne nodded eagerly. "I would be grateful for an introduction." "She will work you hard for little pay," Dorothy warned. "But she is fair, and the room comes with the job." Before Dorothy could give directions, the door opened again, and a man stepped inside with the kind of presence that seemed to draw all the air in the room toward him. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey in lamplight. Dust covered his boots and the legs of his worn denim trousers, and he moved with the unconscious grace of someone completely comfortable in his own body. "Afternoon, Dorothy," he said, his voice a low rumble that Marianne felt somewhere beneath her ribs. "I need another coil of rope and some of those peppermints if you have any left." "Samuel York, you have a sweet tooth that will rot your teeth right out of your head," Dorothy said with the tone of someone who had made this observation many times before. "But your money is as good as anyone else's." Samuel grinned, and the expression transformed his weathered face into something almost boyish. Then his gaze landed on Marianne, and his smile faded into something more cautious, more curious. "Madam," he said with a polite nod. "This is Miss Stone, just arrived from back east," Dorothy said. I am about to send her over to Martha's place to see about work." "Welcome to Humboldt," Samuel said, and there was genuine warmth beneath the formality. "It is not much, but it is honest country." "That is exactly what I am looking for," Marianne replied, meeting his eyes directly despite the flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with the heat or the long journey. Samuel gathered his purchases, paid with coins that clinked onto the wooden counter, and tipped his hat to both women before heading back out into the bright afternoon. Marianne found her gaze following him through the dusty window as he mounted a sturdy bay horse and rode off down the wide main street. "He is a good man," Dorothy said quietly. "Came out here 5 years ago with his older brother, planning to make their fortune in silver. The brother died in a mine collapse 2 years back. Samuel gave up mining after that and started running cattle on a piece of land about 6 miles north of town. Works harder than any 3 men I have ever known, trying to build something lasting out of dust and stubbornness." There was approval in Dorothy's voice, and something else too, something that suggested she was sharing this information for a reason. Marianne filed it away in her mind alongside all the other new knowledge she was gathering about this place that might become her home. Martha Henderson turned out to be a practical woman in her 50s with strong hands, and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Marianne of the nuns who had run her childhood school. The boarding house was a 2-story building with whitewashed walls and a wide porch where several chairs sat empty in the afternoon heat. Martha walked Marianne through the rooms, explaining the work with the same efficiency she probably used to explain everything in her life. There were 12 rooms for rent, currently 8 occupied by miners and ranch hands who paid weekly for a bed, and 2 meals a day. The work involved cooking, cleaning, laundry, and maintaining order among men who sometimes forgot their manners after too much whiskey at the saloon down the street. In exchange, Marianne would receive a small room on the ground floor, meals, and $2 a week. "I will not tolerate laziness, dishonesty, or entertaining the boarders," Martha said bluntly. "This is a respectable establishment, and I intend to keep it that way." "I would expect nothing less," Marianne replied. "When would you like me to start? Right now would be fine. That room there is yours. Unpack what little you have, put on an apron, and come help me with supper. We serve at 6 and the men get irritable if the food is late." The room was tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed, washstand, and small trunk that constituted its furnishings. But it had a window that looked out onto a small garden where someone had coaxed vegetables from the reluctant soil, and it was hers. Marianne sat on the edge of the bed for just a moment, letting herself feel the exhaustion of the past weeks, the grief of everything left behind, and the fragile hope of everything that might be possible here in this strange new world. Then she stood, unpacked her few belongings, tied on the apron Martha had provided, and went to help prepare supper for 12 hungry people she had never met. The work was exactly as hard as Martha had promised. Marianne fell into bed each night with her muscles aching and her hands raw from lye soap and hot water. But there was something deeply satisfying about the physical labor, about producing tangible results that could be seen and measured. The beds she made stayed made until someone slept in them. The meals she cooked got eaten. The floors she scrubbed got dirty again, but that just meant there was work tomorrow. The boarders were mostly polite, a mixture of men chasing dreams of silver riches or saving money for land of their own. They called her Miss Stone and thanked her for the food and kept their rough jokes and tobacco spitting to the porch after she made it clear such behavior would not be tolerated inside. She saw Samuel York in town occasionally over the next few weeks. He would tip his hat and exchange a few words, always courteous but never presumptuous. She learned more about him from the fragments of conversation she overheard at the boarding house, from Dorothy's occasional comments at the trading post, from the way people spoke his name with respect. He was 26 years old, hardworking and honest, the kind of man who paid his debts and helped his neighbors without being asked. His ranch was small but growing, and he had ambitions to build it into something substantial. He came to town once or twice a week for supplies, attended church on Sundays when he could spare the time, and kept mostly to himself in a way that suggested old grief rather than unfriendliness. Marianne told herself that her interest was merely natural curiosity about her new community. She told herself that the flutter in her chest when she spotted him riding down the street was just surprise. She told herself many things that were not quite lies, but not quite the truth either. 6 weeks after her arrival in Humboldt, on a Sunday morning that dawned clear and already warm with the promise of brutal heat to come, Marianne walked to the small church at the edge of town. It was a simple building, more a chapel really, with whitewashed walls and rough wooden pews that seated perhaps 50 people on a crowded day. The preacher was a circuit rider who made it to Humboldt twice a month, and on the weeks he was absent, the congregation sang hymns and read scripture and called it good enough. This was one of the weeks with a preacher, and the small building was nearly full when Marianne slipped into a back pew. She was smoothing her skirt, one of only 2 dresses she owned and the better of the pair, when someone settled onto the bench beside her. She looked up and found Samuel York looking back at her with those whiskey-colored eyes. "Morning, Miss Stone," he said quietly, mindful of the other conversations happening around them. "Mind if I sit here?" "Not at all," she managed, despite the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. The service began before they could say anything else, but Marianne was acutely aware of Samuel's presence beside her through every hymn and prayer. His voice when he sang was a pleasant baritone, slightly off-key but earnest. His hands when he held the hymnal were work-roughened, with healing scrapes across the knuckles and calluses that spoke of ropes and tools and hard labor. When the service ended and people began filing out into the bright morning, Samuel turned to her with what looked like carefully prepared courage. "Miss Stone, I wonder if I might walk with you a bit. There is something I would like to ask you." "Of course," she said, and tried to ignore the interested glances from several of the women who were clearly taking note of this interaction. They walked away from the church, toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land that stretched toward distant mountains. The heat was already building, but a faint breeze made it bearable, carrying the scent of sage and dust and the peculiar emptiness of the desert. "I have been thinking," Samuel began, then stopped and seemed to reconsider his words. He took off his hat and turned it in his hands, a gesture that suggested nervousness despite his generally confident demeanor. "I should probably start by saying that I am not a man who is good with fancy words. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say, and if that is too plain for Eastern sensibilities, I apologize in advance." "Plain speaking is refreshing," Marianne said. "I have had quite enough of fancy words that mean nothing." He glanced at her, something shifting in his expression, as though she had confirmed a suspicion or answered a question he had not asked aloud. "Fair enough. Here is the truth then. I have a ranch that is more dream than reality at the moment. I have cattle and land and big plans, but not much in the way of comfort or security. I work from before dawn until after dark most days, and sometimes that still does not feel like enough." Marianne listened, unsure where this was leading but sensing that it was important that these words cost him something to speak. "What I do not have," Samuel continued, "is much hope. I work hard because it is what I know how to do, and I keep building because stopping would mean admitting that my brother died for nothing. But hope, real hope that this can become something good, that has been in short supply." He stopped walking and turned to face her fully, replacing his hat so he could meet her eyes without squinting into the sun. "Then you arrived in town with nothing. Dorothy told me that much, and I am not gossiping out of turn because half the town knows your story. You came here with nothing but the hope that you could start over, that you could build something new." Marianne's throat felt tight. Hope does not pay debts or put food on the table. "Maybe not directly," Samuel agreed, "but without it, what is the point of anything else? I have been watching you these past weeks, and I hope you do not think that presumptuous of me. I have seen you working hard, keeping your head high, treating people with kindness even when you are clearly exhausted. You have hope, Miss Stone, and it shows in everything you do." "I am not sure I understand what you are asking me," Marianne said, though she was beginning to suspect and hardly dared to believe it. "I am asking if you would consider coming out to my ranch," Samuel said. "Not today, but soon. I would like to show you what I am building, what I am trying to create, because if you are willing to consider it, I would like to try building it with you." Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "Mr. York, we barely know each other." "That is true," he acknowledged. "But I know you are brave because you came out here alone. I know you are hardworking because I have heard Martha Henderson praise you, and that woman does not give compliments lightly. I know you are kind because I have seen you with the children at the trading post. And I know that when you smile, which is not often enough, it feels like the sun coming out from behind clouds." Marianne felt heat flooding her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Nevada morning. "That is quite poetic for a man who claims not to be good with fancy words." "It is just the truth," Samuel said simply. "I am not proposing marriage right this moment, Miss Stone. I am just asking if you would be willing to spend some time with me, to see if maybe we could build something together. Because hope is all we need to build everything else." The words settled over her like a blessing, like permission to want something more than mere survival. She had come to Humboldt with nothing but hope, and here was a man who recognized that hope was not nothing at all. It was the foundation, the seed, the first spark that could become a flame. "Yes," she said, "I would like that very much." The smile that spread across Samuel's face was worth every hard mile she had traveled to get here, every moment of fear and uncertainty and grief. "How about next Sunday? I could pick you up after church, bring you out to the ranch, show you around, and have you back to town before dark." "That would be acceptable," Marianne said, and felt something loosen in her chest, something she had not even realized had been clenched tight since the day her old life fell apart. They walked back toward the boarding house, talking more easily now, sharing small pieces of their stories. Samuel told her about growing up in Missouri, about heading west with his brother Jacob with dreams of finding silver and striking it rich. He told her about the mine collapse, about holding his brother's hand in the darkness while the dust settled, and the life faded from Jacob's eyes. He told her about buying the land with the money they had saved, about deciding that building something from the earth itself was more honest than digging holes in search of metal that might never appear. Marianne told him about Philadelphia, about her father's banking business and how his partner had embezzled money while her father was ill, leaving them with nothing but debts and accusations. She told him about her mother's death 2 years earlier, about her father following her 6 months later, broken by shame and sickness. She told him about Thomas, though she did not dwell on that particular pain, and about making the choice to head west because there was nothing left for her in the east except pity and whispers. "I am sorry you went through all that," Samuel said quietly as they reached the boarding house steps. "But I cannot say I am sorry it brought you here. Neither can I, Marianne admitted. He tipped his hat, his eyes warm. Until Sunday, then. Until Sunday. The week stretched out both interminably long and startlingly short. Marianne went through her work in a haze of anticipation and nervousness, scrubbing floors and cooking meals while her mind wandered to what Sunday might bring. Martha noticed her distraction and commented on it with a knowing look but did not pry, which Marianne appreciated. On Saturday evening, Dorothy appeared at the boarding house with a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "This is for you," she said, pressing it into Marianne's hands. "Consider it a welcome to Humboldt gift, though it is a bit late in coming." Inside was a dress of soft yellow cotton, simple but well made, with tiny flowers embroidered around the collar. It was beautiful and far too generous. "Dorothy, I cannot possibly accept this." "Yes, you can and you will," Dorothy said firmly. "That dress has been sitting in my inventory for 8 months with no buyer. Consider it payment for giving this town something interesting to talk about besides mine yields and whose cow got loose." "Is the whole town talking about me?" Marianne asked, mortified. "Only in the best way," Dorothy assured her. "Samuel York is well liked, and people are happy to see him taking an interest in something besides cattle and fence posts. Besides, everyone loves a romance." "It is not a romance. It is just a visit to a ranch." Dorothy's expression was pure skepticism. "If you believe that, you are not as clever as I thought. That man looks at you like you hung the moon and stars, and unless I am very much mistaken, you look at him the same way." Marianne could not argue with that, so she simply hugged Dorothy and thanked her for the dress, which fit perfectly when she tried it on in the privacy of her small room. Sunday arrived with cloudless skies and the kind of heat that made everything shimmer. Marianne put on the yellow dress, pinned her dark hair up carefully, and tried to calm the butterflies rioting in her stomach. Samuel arrived at the boarding house precisely when he had said he would, driving a wagon rather than riding his horse, with the bed lined with blankets to make the ride more comfortable. He looked at her in the yellow dress, and his expression made her glad she had accepted Dorothy's gift. "You look beautiful, Miss Stone." "Thank you," she managed. "You look very nice yourself." He did, in clean trousers and a shirt that was clearly his best, with his hair still damp from washing and his face freshly shaved. He helped her up onto the wagon seat with his hand steady under her elbow, then climbed up beside her and clicked to the horses. They rolled out of Humboldt, heading north on a rutted track that wound through sage-dotted landscape toward distant hills. Samuel pointed out landmarks as they went, telling her about the area with obvious affection. There was the creek, mostly dry this time of year but a torrent in spring when the mountain snow melted. There were the old mine shafts, abandoned when the veins played out. There was the place where he had found a lost calf last winter, half frozen and bleeding pitifully, and brought it home draped across his saddle. "You saved it?" Marianne asked. "I tried. She lived about a week, long enough for me to think maybe she would make it." Samuel's jaw tightened slightly. "Then she died anyway. Sometimes trying is not enough." "But sometimes it is," Marianne said gently. "And we cannot know which times are which unless we try." He glanced at her and the tightness in his jaw eased. "That is a good way of looking at it." The ranch, when they reached it, was modest but showed signs of careful planning and hard work. There was a small cabin with a stone chimney and a covered porch, a barn that looked newer than the house, a corral with sturdy fencing, and a windmill that spun lazily in the breeze, pumping water into a wooden trough. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the pale landscape. "It is not much yet," Samuel said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it is mine, free and clear. No debts, no partners, no one to answer to but myself." "It is wonderful," Marianne said honestly. She could see the potential in every carefully placed board, every straight fence line, every gallon of water coaxed from the earth. This was not just a ranch. It was a testament to determination and faith in the future. Samuel showed her around with obvious pride tempered by self-consciousness. The barn was organized with the care of someone who understood that small efficiencies added up to survival. The garden behind the house was struggling but alive, rows of vegetables fighting for life in the harsh conditions. The cabin interior was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace, a simple table and chairs, a rope bed in one corner, and shelves lined with supplies. "I know it is rough," Samuel said, watching her take it in. "A woman would probably want curtains and such. Softness. I have not gotten around to that kind of thing." "A woman would probably want a solid roof and walls that keep out the weather," Marianne replied. "Everything else is decoration." Relief flooded his features. "That is practical thinking." "I have learned to be practical," Marianne said. "Though I confess I do like curtains." "Then curtains you shall have," Samuel said with a grin, "assuming you stick around long enough to hang them." They sat on the porch and ate the lunch Samuel had packed. Simple fare of bread and cheese and apples, but it tasted like a feast in the clean air with the open land stretching out before them. Samuel told her more about his plans, about wanting to expand the herd, about hoping to build a bigger house eventually, about dreams that had seemed hollow until recently. "What changed?" Marianne asked. Samuel looked at her for a long moment. "You arrived in town. And I remembered that hope is not just about having dreams. It is about believing those dreams can actually come true. I had forgotten that. Your brother's death took that from you." "Yes," Samuel acknowledged. "Jacob was always the hopeful one, the one who believed things would work out. I was the practical one, the one who planned and worried. After he died, I had all the practical skills but none of the hope. It made everything feel pointless, even when I was working towards something." Marianne understood more than she could easily express. "I know that feeling. After my father died and Thomas ended our engagement, I felt like I was just going through motions. Getting up, getting dressed, existing but not really living. Coming here was terrifying, but it was also the first thing that felt like a real choice in a very long time." "Hope is a choice," Samuel said. "That is what I am learning. It is not something that just happens to you. You have to decide to have it even when everything suggests you should not." "Is that what you are doing?" Marianne asked. "Choosing hope?" "Every day," Samuel said. "But it is easier now than it was before." The afternoon drifted past in conversation and comfortable silences, in walking through the landscape while Samuel pointed out property boundaries and places where he planned future improvements. He showed her where he wanted to eventually build a bigger house, on a slight rise with views in all directions. He showed her the creek bed where water ran in spring, creating a green ribbon through the brown land. He showed her his world, and with every step, Marianne felt herself falling more deeply into possibilities she had not dared to imagine. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Samuel drove her back to town, both of them quieter now, wrapped in thoughts too new to speak aloud. When they reached the boarding house, he helped her down and held her hand a moment longer than strictly necessary. "May I call on you again?" he asked. "I would like that very much," Marianne replied. "Next Sunday?" "Yes." He smiled, squeezed her hand gently, then released it and climbed back onto the wagon. Marianne stood on the porch and watched him drive away, her heart full of a feeling she had almost forgotten: possibility. The courtship that followed was conducted under the interested eyes of most of Humboldt's population, which meant they had very little privacy, but also a great deal of support. Samuel came to town twice a week without fail, once for supplies and once specifically to see Marianne. They walked together, ate meals together when Martha allowed it, and talked about everything from their childhoods to their dreams for the future. Samuel was a man of deep feelings carefully contained, someone who had learned to keep his emotions close after too much loss. But with Marianne, those walls slowly crumbled. He told her about his parents, who had died in a cholera outbreak when he was 15, about raising his younger brother Jacob through sheer determination. He told her about the first time he had seen the Western Territories, about feeling like he could finally breathe after years of suffocating in crowded cities. He told her things he admitted he had never told anyone, trusting her with pieces of himself he usually kept hidden. Marianne found herself doing the same, sharing memories of her mother's kindness, of her father's love of music, of growing up in a world that now felt like it belonged to a different person entirely. She told Samuel about her fear that she would never be good enough, never be strong enough, never be enough, period. And he listened with the same careful attention he brought to everything, making her feel heard in a way she had never experienced before. "You are more than enough," he told her one evening as they sat on the boarding house porch, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You are everything." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of sincerity that made Marianne's eyes sting with tears. She reached for his hand, and he laced his fingers through hers, solid and warm and real. 3 months after that first Sunday at the ranch, on an October evening when the brutal summer heat had finally broken and the air carried a hint of coming winter, Samuel asked Marianne to marry him. They were walking along the edge of town, in the in-between space where civilization met wilderness, and he stopped and turned to her with nervous determination. "I have been thinking about how to do this properly," he said. "I thought about getting a ring first, maybe asking permission from someone, though I am not sure who, since you do not have family here. I thought about making a speech, something worthy of the moment." "Samuel," Marianne said gently, her heart already racing because she knew what was coming and wanted it with an intensity that almost frightened her. "But that is not who I am," Samuel continued. "I am just a man who works hard and tries to be honest and has fallen completely in love with you. So I am just going to ask, plain and simple, Marianne Stone, will you marry me? Will you come build a life with me out on that ranch? Will you choose hope with me every day and let me choose it with you?" Tears spilled down Marianne's cheeks, but she was smiling so hard her face hurt. "Yes. Yes to all of it." Samuel pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest where she could hear his heart pounding as hard as her own. When he kissed her, it was gentle and reverent and full of promise, the kind of kiss that marked a beginning rather than a culmination. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church where they had sat together that first Sunday. Dorothy and Martha stood up with Marianne, and Samuel's neighbor, a weathered cattle rancher named Frank who had given Samuel advice and assistance over the years, stood up with him. Most of the town attended, crowding into the little building and spilling out onto the sparse lawn, all of them eager to witness and celebrate this union. Marianne wore a dress that Dorothy had helped her make from white muslin, simple but elegant, with her grandmother's wedding ring finally moved from the chain around her neck to her finger where it belonged. Samuel wore his best clothes and a look of such happiness that it transformed him from merely handsome to absolutely radiant. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony with warmth and humor, speaking about faith and commitment, and the particular courage it took to build a life in such unforgiving country. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the congregation cheered, and Samuel kissed Marianne with enthusiasm that made her blush and laugh at the same time. The reception was held at the boarding house, with Martha providing food and Dorothy providing music on a battered piano that had somehow made its way to Humboldt years earlier. There was dancing and toasting, and well wishes offered with varying degrees of eloquence but uniform sincerity. As the sun set and the celebration continued, Samuel pulled Marianne aside onto the porch into a pocket of relative quiet. "How are you doing, Mrs. York?" The name sent a thrill through her. "I am perfect, though I confess I am eager to go home." "Home," Samuel repeated, and she could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Our home." They left the party as soon as it was polite to do so, climbing into the wagon that Samuel had decorated with ribbons. The drive to the ranch felt shorter than usual, both of them eager to begin this new chapter. The cabin looked welcoming in the lamplight Samuel had left burning, and when he carried her over the threshold, Marianne laughed at the traditional gesture executed with such care. The cabin had been transformed in the weeks leading up to the wedding. There were curtains on the windows now, yellow fabric that matched the dress Marianne had worn on their first outing together. There was a new quilt on the bed that Martha had helped make, pieced from scraps but beautiful in its patterns. There were flowers in a jar on the table, wildflowers that must have taken Samuel considerable effort to find in the autumn landscape. "You did all this?" Marianne asked, touched beyond words. "I had help," Samuel admitted. "Dorothy picked out the curtain fabric. Martha taught me how to put up the rods without destroying the walls. But I wanted you to feel welcome here, to feel like this is your home, not just mine." "It is ours," Marianne said firmly. She took his hands and looked into those whiskey-colored eyes that had captured her attention from the very beginning. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for seeing hope in me when I barely had any left to spare. Thank you for asking me to build this with you." "Thank you for saying yes," Samuel replied. He pulled her close and kissed her with rising passion, and Marianne kissed him back with all the love and hope and determination she possessed. Their wedding night was tender and awkward and perfect in the way of two people learning each other, choosing vulnerability, choosing hope. They loved each other with gentle urgency as the lamplight flickered, and the desert night settled around their home like a blessing. The months that followed were hard work and deep satisfaction in equal measure. Marianne learned the rhythms of ranch life, the endless cycle of tasks that kept humans and animals alive in this harsh environment. She learned to cook on the temperamental wood stove, to preserve food for the winter, to help Samuel with the cattle when needed. Her hands, which had once been soft and pale, became weathered and strong. Samuel, in turn, learned to share his space and his life, to consider another person in his decisions, to let someone past his carefully maintained walls. He taught Marianne to ride, spending patient hours helping her gain confidence on horseback. He taught her to read the weather, to understand the signs that meant coming storms. He taught her the names of the landscape features visible from their porch, the stories behind them, the history of this place they were making their own. The first winter tested them in ways neither had fully anticipated. The cold was brutal, and the isolation even more so. There were days when Samuel could not leave the ranch because the cattle needed constant attention, when snow piled so high that even reaching the barn became an ordeal. Marianne learned what it meant to be truly dependent on another person, and Samuel learned what it meant to have someone depending on him in turn. But they learned together, and that made all the difference. When Marianne was frightened by the howling wind and the endless white landscape, Samuel held her and reminded her that spring always came eventually. When Samuel was worried about the cattle, or the supplies, or the 100 things that could go wrong, Marianne reminded him that they had each other and hope, and those were enough to face whatever came. Spring arrived like a miracle, the snow melting in rushing torrents that turned the creek into a real watercourse. Green spread across the land like a promise being kept, and the cattle grew fat on fresh grass. Samuel expanded the herd that year, buying young stock from a rancher who was selling out and heading back east. It was a risk, stretching their resources thin, but it paid off when every animal survived and thrived. On a warm May evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, Marianne told Samuel that she was expecting a child. She had suspected for weeks, but had wanted to be certain before saying anything, afraid to speak the hope aloud in case it proved false. Samuel's reaction was everything she could have wanted. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight, his face buried in her hair, and she felt his shoulders shake with emotion. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were wet but his smile was incandescent. "A baby," he said, as though testing the word. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Marianne asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Samuel said. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "This is everything, Marianne. This is hope made real." The pregnancy was not easy. The isolation of the ranch and the harshness of the environment made every aspect more challenging. But Martha came out to stay for weeks at a time as Marianne's due date approached, bringing her experience and her no-nonsense practicality. Dorothy sent supplies and encouraging notes. Even Frank, Samuel's neighbor, stopped by regularly to check on them and help Samuel with heavy work that Marianne could no longer do. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1878, arriving after a long night of labor that terrified Samuel and exhausted Marianne. But when Martha placed the squalling, red-faced infant in Marianne's arms, every moment of pain dissolved into pure joy. Samuel sat beside her on the bed, looking at his son with an expression of wonder and terror and overwhelming love. "What should we name him?" Marianne asked, stroking the baby's dark hair. Samuel was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Jacob, after my brother, if that is all right with you." Marianne's eyes filled with tears. "It is perfect." Little Jacob York was a healthy, lusty baby who quickly became the center of his parents' universe. Samuel proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to help with feedings, rocking the baby for hours when he was fussy, talking to him in a gentle voice that Marianne had never heard him use before. Marianne watched her husband transform from a man who had forgotten how to hope into a man who was actively building a future, and fell in love with him even more deeply. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. The ranch prospered as Samuel's hard work and careful planning paid dividends. They expanded the house, adding rooms as their family grew. A daughter arrived 2 years after Jacob, a girl they named Emily who had her father's eyes and her mother's determination. Another son came 2 years after that, Thomas Samuel, called Tom from the start to avoid confusion with his father. Humboldt grew and changed around them. The mining industry fluctuated wildly, with boom times and bust times that shaped the town's population and prosperity. But Samuel's ranch provided stability, a constant in the midst of change. He became a respected member of the community, serving on various committees and helping newcomers the way Frank had once helped him. Marianne found her own place in the community, becoming known as someone who could be relied on in times of crisis. She helped deliver babies, nurse the sick, and provide comfort to those facing loss. The scared young woman who had arrived with nothing but hope had become a pillar of strength, and she sometimes marveled at the transformation. But the greatest marvel was always her family, the life she and Samuel had built together. On difficult days, when the weather was brutal, or the children were sick or money was tight, she would remember that October evening when Samuel had asked her to marry him, when he had talked about choosing hope every day. And she would choose it again, Deliberately and with full knowledge of both its cost and its value, Samuel did the same. There were moments when Marianne caught him watching their children play, or gazing at the ranch that had grown from a dream into a reality, and she could see the wonder in his expression. He had built all of this from hope and hard work, and he never took it for granted. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they stood together on the porch of their expanded home, watching their 3 children play in the yard. Jacob was 8 now, already showing signs of inheriting his father's height and his mother's quick mind. Emily was 6, fearless and affectionate in equal measure. Little Tom was 4, a whirlwind of energy and curiosity. "Do you remember what I said when I proposed?" Samuel asked, his arm around Marianne's waist. "You said several things," Marianne replied with a smile. "But I think I know which part you mean. Hope is all we need to build everything else," Samuel quoted. "I believed it then, but I did not fully understand what it meant. Now I do." Marianne leaned into her husband's solid warmth. "What does it mean?" "It means that everything we have, everything we are, started with the choice to hope, to believe that something better was possible even when we had no evidence to support that belief. You arrived in Humboldt with nothing but hope, and that was enough. It was the seed that grew into all of this." "We grew it together," Marianne corrected gently. "My hope and your hard work, your hope and my determination. Hope is the seed, but it takes more than that to make things grow." "True enough," Samuel agreed. He turned to face her fully, his hands coming up to cup her face with infinite tenderness. "I love you, Marianne York. I loved you when you were a stranger stepping off a stagecoach, though I did not know it yet. I loved you when you came to the ranch that first time and saw possibility instead of poverty. I love you now, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Tears slipped down Marianne's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I love you too, Samuel York. You gave me a home when I had none. You gave me a family when I was alone. You gave me hope when I thought I had run out. You are everything to me." They kissed as their children's laughter rang out across the land they had tamed together. As the sun set over the Nevada desert they had made their own. As the hope they had chosen every single day bloomed into something even more beautiful. A life well lived together. The years continued to flow like water through their hands, precious and impossible to hold, but leaving their mark nonetheless. Jacob grew into a young man with his father's work ethic and his mother's compassion, eventually taking over more and more of the ranch operations as Samuel's hair turned gray at the temples. Emily surprised everyone by developing a talent for numbers and business, helping her parents navigate the increasingly complex financial aspects of running a successful ranch. Tom became the wanderer of the family, traveling throughout the Western territories and sending letters full of adventures that kept his parents simultaneously proud and terrified. Humboldt evolved around them, surviving the mining industry's inevitable decline by diversifying into ranching and farming and becoming a supply hub for the surrounding region. The church got a permanent preacher. The school expanded. The rough edges of frontier life smoothed slightly, though never completely disappeared. Samuel and Marianne grew older together, their bodies wearing the marks of hard use but their spirits remaining strong. They became grandparents when Jacob married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property and started a family of his own. Emily eventually married as well, choosing a young lawyer from Carson City who loved her fierce intelligence and was willing to move to Humboldt to be near her family. Tom sent word that he had settled in Montana, married a schoolteacher, and started his own ranch, carrying forward the legacy his parents had built through it all. Through every season and crisis and celebration, Samuel and Marianne held tight to the principle that had brought them together: hope. They chose it deliberately when their daughter suffered a difficult childbirth that nearly claimed her life. They chose it when drought threatened the ranch, and they had to make impossible decisions about which cattle to sell. They chose it when the railroad came through 20 miles north, changing everything about how they operated. They chose it when old friends died and when new challenges arose, and when the future looked uncertain. Because they had learned, through decades of building a life together, that hope was not blind optimism or foolish disregard for reality. It was the stubborn insistence that better things were possible even in the face of difficulty. It was the choice to plant seeds even when the soil looked poor. It was the decision to keep building even when the wind tried to tear everything down. On a spring morning in 1901, Samuel and Marianne sat on their porch, much as they had done thousands of times before. They were in their 50s now, weathered and worn but still strong, still choosing each other and choosing hope every single day. The ranch sprawled around them, prosperous and well-managed, a testament to what could be built from almost nothing. "You ever regret it?" Samuel asked suddenly. "Leaving everything you knew, coming out here with nothing?" Marianne looked at her husband, at the man who had seen hope in her when she barely had any left, who had asked her to build a life with him based on nothing more substantial than faith in the future. She thought about the scared young woman who had stepped off that stagecoach so many years ago, about how impossible this life would have seemed to that version of herself. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You were right, Samuel. Hope is all we need to build everything else. And look what we have built." She gestured at the land, the house, the visible evidence of their life together. But more than that, she meant their children and grandchildren, their place in the community, the love that had sustained them through everything. She meant the thousands of small choices that had added up to this moment, this life, this overwhelming sense of rightness. Samuel smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. "We built it together. That is the important part." "Always together," Marianne agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher in the cloudless sky, choosing hope one more time, as they would continue to do for all the days remaining to them. Because that was what love required and what life demanded, and what they had learned to do so well. To keep building, keep hoping, keep choosing each other and the life they had created from nothing more than determination and faith in possibilities unseen. The story of how a woman arrived in Humboldt with nothing but hope, and how a cowboy recognized that hope was all they needed to build everything else, was told and retold in the town for generations. It became a kind of legend, the way true stories sometimes do. A tale of love and courage and the peculiar magic of two people choosing to build a life together against all odds. But for Samuel and Marianne York, it was not a legend. It was simply their life, the one they had chosen and fought for and nurtured with every ounce of strength they possessed. And when they eventually passed, first Samuel and then Marianne 2 years later, they left behind a legacy that was measured not just in acres and cattle and descendants, but in the hope they had modeled for everyone who knew them. Their grandchildren continued to run the ranch, teaching their own children the lessons Samuel and Marianne had taught them about hard work and faith, and the importance of choosing hope, even when circumstances suggested otherwise. The York Ranch became an institution in the region, known for its quality cattle and its even better reputation. And sometimes, on spring mornings when the light hit just right, when the desert bloomed with improbable flowers and the air smelled of sage and possibility, people swore they could feel something special about the place. A sense that something true and good had happened here, that two people had built something lasting from the raw material of hope and love, because that was exactly what had happened. A woman had arrived in Humboldt, Nevada in 1876 with nothing but hope and a battered carpetbag. A cowboy had seen that hope and recognized its value, had offered to build a life with her based on nothing more substantial than faith in the future. And together, they had proven that hope really was all you needed to build everything else, as long as you chose it every single day and had someone to choose it with you. Their story was not unique in the grand sweep of history. Countless people had come west seeking new beginnings, had fallen in love against unlikely odds, had built ranches and homes and families in harsh conditions. But every true story is unique to the people living it, and for Samuel and Marianne York, their story was everything. It was the moment their eyes first met in Dorothy's trading post, a spark of recognition neither understood immediately. It was that first Sunday at the ranch, when Marianne saw past the poverty to the potential, and Samuel saw past her fear to her strength. It was the proposal, simple and heartfelt, offered without pretense or elaborate planning. It was the wedding in the small church with the whole town celebrating. It was the hard years and the good years and all the years in between, each one chosen deliberately, each one built on the foundation of hope. And when the last of their generation passed away, when even their children had grown old and their grandchildren had children of their own, the story remained. It lived in the land itself, in the ranch that still bore their name, in the town that had witnessed their love story from beginning to end. It lived in the lesson they had taught through their example. That hope is not foolish or naive, but rather the most practical and necessary of all human qualities. Because without hope, there is no reason to take risks or make sacrifices or build anything meant to last longer than a single lifetime. Without hope, there is only the grinding present, devoid of possibility. But with hope, even the smallest seed can grow into something magnificent. With hope, two strangers can become partners, lovers, friends, family. With hope, nothing can become everything. That was what Marianne Stone learned when she stepped off a stagecoach in Humboldt with nothing but hope and a worn carpetbag. That was what Samuel York already knew but had forgotten until she reminded him. And that was what they built their entire life upon, the stubborn, courageous, absolutely essential choice to hope. Their story ended as all stories must, but what they built lasted far beyond their own lives. The ranch prospered for generations. The town they had been part of continued to grow and change. The descendants they left behind carried forward their values and their legacy. And sometimes, when those descendants faced their own challenges and uncertainties, they would remember the story of how it all began. A woman with nothing but hope. A cowboy who recognized hope's value. And a simple truth that proved powerful enough to build an entire life upon. Hope is all we need to build everything else. That truth sustained Samuel and Marianne through decades of marriage, through the joys and sorrows that mark every long life, through the transformation of raw frontier into settled civilization. It was the first thing they taught their children and the most important thing they left behind. Not the ranch, not the material prosperity they had achieved, but the knowledge that hope combined with hard work and love could overcome almost any obstacle. And so their story, which began with a dusty arrival in a small Nevada town in 1876, became part of the fabric of the place itself. It was told around dinner tables and at community gatherings. It was referenced in toasts at weddings and quoted in times of trouble. It became one of those stories that helped define a community's sense of itself, a reminder of what was possible when people chose courage over fear and hope over despair. For Samuel and Marianne themselves, the story was simpler and more profound than any legend. It was the life they had lived together, the love they had shared, the family they had created. It was every morning they woke up beside each other and chose to keep building. It was every evening they sat on their porch and watched the sun set over land they had tamed together. It was every moment, big and small, that added up to a life well lived. When Marianne died in 1919 at the age of 65, surrounded by children and grandchildren in the house she and Samuel had built, her last words were about hope. She looked at her family gathered around her bed and said, with the clarity that sometimes comes at the end, "Never stop hoping. Never stop building. It is all that matters." And they understood, because they had lived her example, that she was not just talking about material things. She was talking about building lives, building families, building futures. She was talking about the choice that she and Samuel had made so many years ago, the choice to believe that something better was possible even when the evidence was thin. That choice, made over and over again throughout their long lives together, was their legacy. It was more valuable than the prosperous ranch, more important than the financial security they had achieved. It was the gift they gave to everyone who knew them, the knowledge that hope is not just a feeling but an action, a choice, a way of living. The York Ranch continued for many generations, each one adding to what Samuel and Marianne had started, each one facing their own challenges and making their own choices about hope and courage and love. The landscape changed, as landscapes always do. Humboldt grew and modernized. The Wild West became the Old West, and then just history. But the essential truth that Samuel and Marianne had lived remained constant. Hope, combined with hard work and love and the courage to keep trying even when outcomes are uncertain, really is all you need to build everything else. They proved it with their lives, and their proof became part of the story of the American West, one of countless examples of ordinary people doing extraordinary things simply because they chose to hope. And perhaps that is the best ending to their story, not an ending at all but a continuation, a legacy that outlived them and influenced people they would never meet. Because that is what happens when you build something real and true. It does not end when you do. It continues, growing and changing but remaining rooted in the same soil of hope and determination, and love that nurtured it from the beginning. Samuel and Marianne York came from nothing and built everything. They did it together, choosing hope every single day, proving that sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is the simple belief that tomorrow can be better than today. Their story is finished, but what they built lives on, a testament to the enduring power of hope and the extraordinary things that become possible when two people decide to build a life together. No matter how unlikely the circumstances or how uncertain the outcome. That is their story, complete and true. From the dusty day she arrived with nothing but hope to the many years of love and building that followed. It is a story about courage and faith, and the choice to keep trying even when success is far from guaranteed. It is a story about the Wild West, about taming harsh land and building communities in unlikely places. But most of all, it is a story about love, the kind of love that grows stronger over decades, that weathers every storm, that becomes the foundation for everything else. And it all began with hope, which turned out to be exactly enough.